We're ranking all the precons that came out this year from worst to best.
I'm Mia, and I like long socks in the winter.
I'm Beezy. I like scratching the ears of cats if they let me. And we're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. You can go to their website and at checkout, enter the code
NERDS
to save 5%.
You are also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you like the code
NERDS,
you can use it there to save 5% of your real money tax dollars on your entire order.
Also sponsored by Moxfield. They're really cool. You're going to hear from them later in the video. You're not going to guess why. I'm going to bamboozle you multiple times, but we can just get into the top precons of the year.
In 2023, there were 25 precons over the entire year, and we're going to be announcing them from worst to best in our opinion. BZ, what are the criteria that we're going to be judging them on?
We're going to be judging a lot of things. It's commander, original price, today's value of the cards in the deck, the reprints, the new cards, the synergy, the duds, the mana base, the ramp, the removal, and the card draw. This is a pretty definitive list, I would say.
This is a pretty definitive list, so we're going to start off with what we think is the worst precon of 2023. At 25, it's Planeswalker Party, with Commodore Guff as the commander. It started off at $75, and its today's value is $68, so it's a drop.
You're not getting too much bang for your buck. This is the commander, Planeswalker deck, but they didn't want to go Woober, which I respect. They went Jeskai for it, and this deck is just a complete mess. Guff draws cards and deals damage based on the number of Planeswalkers you control. That's cool. The plus is make a 1/1, nothing super memorable. But I just think this deck fell flat in basically every possible way. There were some good reprints. The Chain Veil, Chandra, Awakened Inferno, those were some of the best ones. The new cards that are going to see play, Chandra, Legacy of Fire is good for Planeswalkers decks. Then you have Vronos, Masked Inquisitor. He's the one that phases stuff out. So there's some cool little gems in this deck, but as a deck, I think it's kind of garbage.
I think it's really, really rough too. Planeswalkers are notoriously really weak in Commander considering they're really hard to protect, and most of the time their abilities aren't that impactful. This deck is actually just crammed full of all of the bad ones, which makes it just a bad deck overall.
Yeah, you don't get the cream of the crop. You get 5 or so maybe Planeswalkers. Let's walk you through some of the duds, like Narset of the Ancient Way. This is the type of Planeswalker in this deck where it pluses to make mana, it -2s to loot, and then if you discard, you deal damage to something based on what you discard. It's just these cards are not going to win you the game, and they don't do anything together except be Planeswalkers. And there's stuff like Oresco's Explorer, just a random 2/2. What does a Planeswalker deck want with this card? I don't know.
There's a lot of cards that just aren't synergistic, or they're synergistic to themselves and then just don't really interact with most other parts of the deck. Now, moving on to the mana base, there's 18 basics, which is a lot for a 3-color deck. It means you're not going to be able to cast your spells as often as you'd like.
There's certain precons that we'll get to that have a much better spread. There's 15 fixers and 5 utility lands. This is sort of standard precon fare, but we'll see later that there's a lot of precons that actually outdid this. There's 13 ramp spells in the deck. Most of those are just rocks. 14 removal spells. Some of those are generous as they are attached to Planeswalkers and are not the best removal effects. And 8 card draw, which is another place this deck's going to suffer. Aside from Guff, your card draw is not going to come around every game because you don't have a ton of it. And these Planeswalkers together don't really make anything. It's I have Gideon Jura and Narset and Guff. Well, Guff draws me 3, but the rest of them are not helping.
I think it's really easy in this deck to run out of gas. It's really hard to find a ton of synergy, and it's also really hard to protect the Planeswalkers themselves. So in the end, I think that this is just going to be the weakest out of all of them.
Yeah, and on top of all of that, another factor that matters is the value of the cards today is less than what you would have bought the precon for. So I'm just left scratching my head and going, nope, pass. Moving on to the next deck, this is number 24 of 25, Divine Convocation. The commander is Kazla, the Broken Halo. She's got Convoke, and she's got Flying Vigilance Haste. That's cool. And then when you cast a spell with Convoke, you get to do a Preordain type effect. That makes Convoke pretty strong, but what Convoke ended up being is just, hey, there's no support for this. Here's a bunch of random Convoke cards in a deck. Hope to God you have Kazla out. But at least with Kazla, she's pretty easy to recast because of the Convoke.
I was really excited to see this come out considering Convoke didn't have any support, and unfortunately it didn't have much more support with this deck. It started around $50, but the value dropped again to $36, which is one of the reasons why it earned such a low spot on our list.
It's one of the worst conversions of original price to today's value of all the cards if you were to buy them or look at them on Moxville.com, which is, this isn't the ad, don't you worry. But it had some reprints, Elspeth, Sun's Champion, Secure the Waste. These are okay token makers. They're good to convoke, make a bunch of dudes, and then you can cast all your spells. And Kazla's a really good card, but she's held back by the weakness of Convoke. And also, Convoke, for the past 25 years, what were the colors? It was green and white. This deck doesn't even have green, so we lose half the Convoke cards, which were already so slim, and you end up with cards in the deck like Banisher Priest, Deluxe Dragster, and then there's 8 mana 4/5 with Convoke in here. It's just real stinkers.
There were a couple new cards in here that were really awesome, though. Miss Meadow Vanisher was one of them, and Nesting Dovehawk we actually talked about in our top cards of 2023 that helps you populate, which is a really cool one for this deck.
Yeah, the deck's making a lot of tokens. It can definitely use some population, and Miss Meadow Vanisher is just kind of cool with Convoke, and it works in Blink decks and Vehicle decks and all that other stuff. So there was cool cards in the deck, but Convoke is just too weak on its own for this to be a very interesting deck or very fun to play. 24 basics in this deck. If you thought the last one was bad, 24, 13 fixers, and 2 utility lands. There are 7 ramp spells. That's not that much, but this deck gets a little bit of a pass because it's a Convoke deck, so every spell that has Convoke kind of can be ramped with, little dorks.
Unfortunately, though, it has just as many card draw as ramp spells at 7, so it doesn't get a pass there. And it does have 14 removal, which isn't that bad considering you have to be swinging in or just utilizing all those little bodies. But in the end, it's just not that good because once all those bodies get out, you don't have that many things to do with it.
Yeah, you're going to feel real sad after a board wipe.
Moving right along to number 23 is Tinker Time with the commander Gimbal Gremlin Prodigy. Basically, he comes down, he makes an artifact, and that artifact gets 1/1 counters for each type of token artifact that you have on the field. It's pretty weird.
Pretty bizarre commander. You want Food, Blood, Treasure Clue, and Map, and that'll give you a 5/5 at the end of the turn. And then Gimbal sees that is an artifact for the next turn, and then you can get a 6/6, but it's a pretty tame payoff, but it is a cool build around. This is one of the most unique commanders from a precon we've seen. It's also just a really weird character. This is a gremlin who has sentience and builds other robot gremlins, I guess.
Yeah, I like in his little art. He's kind of just hee let me touch these little robots.
Gremlins are just kind of they're like rats on Kaladesh.
Are they?
Yeah, I don't know why this one can move and think.
Yeah, it was toxic waste.
It was toxic waste, probably. The original price of this deck was $50. Today's value of the cards, $33. Nobody cares about this deck. Nobody wants to play this deck. Nobody bought this deck. And the lack of popularity and the real subpar level of reprints means that while this is a cool strategy and a pretty unique thing, this deck in and of itself didn't do too hot. Tireless Tracker and Academy Manufactor, kind of the only reprints I can really remember from this deck being relevant. And Tireless Tracker's it was $5, I remember, when this got reprinted, and that was the best reprint.
That's really sad considering Academy Manufacturer actually spiked at one point to $10. I know it's down a little bit now because of the list and such, but it's still probably carrying a third of this deck's value.
It probably is. Yeah, the new cards, Dance with Calamity was really cool. It's also really kind of bad, so that doesn't really. I don't think any people were not really clamoring for it. The people who wanted it picked it up for $1 or $2. And then Hedron Detonator, cool card. A lot of cards like it, so that's the cream of the crop. Those are the 2 best cards that are new. And so, could you tell me another one? I would be stunned if anyone could tell me one more new card that came out of this deck.
It's written down, and I'm not even sure if I could have named some of those. In this deck, there are a lot of things that it does pretty okay, but it's not that great at any one thing in particular. So unless you upgrade it and really focus it, it's not that good.
Yeah, I think an upgraded version of this deck would slap, but that's not what we're talking about. So you're going to have to cut some of the duds like Everquill Phoenix. No clue why this is in here. Vidalcan Humiliator, another weirdo that I kind of just don't think needs to be in any deck particularly. It's always fun trashing on the duds, but this deck, I gotta say, it was a cool idea. It just didn't get there on the execution.
The mana base in here is a little rough too. 23 basics in a 3-color deck. Kinda not the best. 14 fixers, that's a little bit better considering you are going to have a lot of colored spells and 1 utility land. I think you could have definitely swapped out some of the basics for more utility.
Yeah, 15 ramp, 13 removal, and 8 card draw. Another deck that's lacking in the card draw a little bit. I think that goes a long way when you're trying to play the deck out of the box and make sure it functions every game, especially since Gimbal himself does not draw you any cards like the last 2 commanders did. This deck will suffer and flounder around a little bit more. Now that Amber's here, we can go to number 22, which is the Hosts of Mordor. The commander of this deck is Sauron, Lord of the Rings. LOL, that's pretty funny. He's a giant monster that gets you value when you cast him. He mills you, he makes orcs, and then he reanimates something. So this deck has got a big bad villain at the helm. The original price, $55 for this one, and the value of today's cards, actually $87, so not bad at all.
I'm actually surprised to see first one on our list that actually exceeds the value of what you would have originally paid for it. There's a couple cool reprints too. Reanimate, always a good staple, and Scourge of the Throne. I was pretty surprised to see this in here.
Those are both like $12+ cards. That's nice. New cards, there's some cool ones. Cavern Horde Dragon is like a weird, cousin of Ancient Copper Dragon. And then you got Too Greedily Too Deep, which is another kind of like splashy spell. It can do some things. Synergy for this deck, though, the problem, while the value is great and the thematic stuff is cool, the deck is really bad. It's like extremely unfocused. It wants to do orcs. It wants to do goblins. It wants to do reanimating. It wants to fill the graveyard. Sauron doesn't even necessarily care about any of those things. He's like, I'm just a valuable card. The deck didn't lean enough into reanimation where I think, I'm going to play Sauron and then I'm going to reanimate an 8-drop. It's like, I'm going to play Sauron and then I'm going to get back something. Like, I'm going to get value out of it, but this deck just has no direction.
It's pretty sad considering with certain value commanders, you can just have a general value overall strategy with the deck. But this isn't what the deck actually took. It just went a little bit here, a little bit there, and made it just for a very unfocused deck overall.
Yeah, I think the examples of some of these duds, like Goblin Dark Dwellers and Shiny Impetus, are just... They leave me going, why did I even want these cards in the first place? What was I supposed to be doing? It was a goblin with a text box on it and a goad? I'm goading?
Yeah, it definitely went in a lot of directions, which made it not that good overall. Looking at the mana base, there were 19 basics, 15 lands that fixed your colors, and 4 utility. Again, I think we can just cut some of those basics for more utility, especially this is around the price where precons were starting to creep up into that like $50-ish plus range.
Yeah, $55, I would hope for some more fixers than that, especially since a lot of the dual lands aren't really expensive. They don't eat into like the reprint equity of the deck. Just give me some untapped duels, please. 8 ramp, kind of low. 18 removal, very Grixis of you. And 7 card draw. These decks, they're just afraid to draw cards.
It's really hurting. I think a lot of precons have that problem, honestly, which is why a lot of the newer players don't understand as much that card draw is really important. But luckily, some of the precons higher up on this list fix that problem. But moving on to our list, number 21 is the first Doctor Who one on this list, Masters of Evil with Davros, Dalek creator. He says at the beginning of your end step, if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you make a 3/3 Dalek and they face a villainous choice. I like this considering the choices are a pretty fun mechanic, but unfortunately this deck just didn't do it well.
This is like the villains deck, and I think maybe Wizards sort of like reached for the stars a little bit with this Doctor Who precon set. I don't know if the hype was that high for these sets, but they made so many new cards for the decks. So this deck has like 14 legends in it, but they're all trying to do something completely different. And I think they went for flavor. Like they want there to be every iteration of the Master with like every actor who's ever played him as a new card. And that's just going to lead to like 6 legends who don't care about the other versions of themselves. So the deck's totally unfocused, but it's cool. It's cool villainy going on. The original price was $58, and the thing that kept it up this high is that the cards today are worth $89, which is pretty sick value.
I mean, it's very new too, so who knows how well these cards will actually hold their value. But there are some really awesome reprints. Wound Reflection is one of the greater ones that hasn't been reprinted in a while. And Lightning Greaves, no one can get enough copies of that.
Yeah, I would like infinite copies of Lightning Greaves, please. And there's new stuff like Cyber Conversion and Ashad, the Lone Cyberman. A lot of like Grixis villains that all seem pretty cool, but none of them get to realize their true potential in this deck, including Davros, who's just like sometimes you'll make them choose a villainous choice. And there's some commanders, like I think his name's the Valiard, who does literally nothing if you are not specifically voting or making them face villainous choices. And that's not a lot of cards in this deck. So very, very confused deck. Super good value if you bought it. Like it's a gold mine of cards. It's just not a good deck that I would ever recommend playing.
I wish it really leaned into the villainous choice more. I love the voting type decks and I think it's a really fun concept, but because it's so kind of diluted with goading and such and artifacts that it just goes in too many different directions.
Yeah, there's like a bunch of Cybermen cards and there's a card with affinity for Daleks and it's like, please pick a lane. There are some duds as always. Time Reaper, I think was a meta call when you're playing all of these decks against each other. It will never see play by anyone ever for any other reason. And Don't Blink, very specific hoser type card. Maybe you'll see this. It does have cycling, but not very great. Mana base has 6 basics. Now we're talking. This is part of the reason this deck was so sweet for reprint value. 6 basics. That's what I play in a 3-color deck. That's what I play in my maxed out 3-color decks. The mana bases for Doctor Who precons were awesome. 28 fixers and 3 utility lands. This is like perfect. A+ for this. It's just that the deck was so bad, we had to drop it a few notches.
That's really sad. We had to drop it this far considering how good the mana base was. There was a fair amount of ramp too. There was 10 ramp spells, 13 removal, very fitting for Grixis, and 6 card draw. Another version of Precons at this tier just can't do card draw very well.
You know, the lower 5 Precons of the year, they just can't hang. Let's go to number 20. It's Rebellion Rising. This was the Phyrexia All Will Be One Boros Precon. The commander was Nayali Sun's Vanguard. Your tokens have double strike, and if you start attacking, you can exile cards to then cast when you attacked with a token. Pretty cool commanders. I gotta say, Othari is the other one, and Nayali, really cool. They just kind of like don't make me think of this deck at all. The price originally was around $50, and the value of the cards today is around $51, so you're not getting away with anything if you bought this Precon. You must have bought it because it was cool and you liked the cards and you wanted them now. It just wasn't good value.
Or you just saw the one reprint that was really, really good, Flawless Maneuver. I mean, really good in combat deck, but then the reprints drop immediately. Talisman of Conviction, that's a rough drop.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep drop. Sometimes they do that where they print one really good card and the rest have to suffer for it. The new cards, Clever Concealment. This was a really good one. It's still, I think, one of the best cards to come out this year. So, and Staff of the Storyteller saw some like legacy play, so it kind of was pricey at a moment. So maybe there was a point where maybe if you got a good deal on this deck and you bought it for like 30, you could flip it for 60 at its peak and you can get some stuff going there. The synergy, I think this deck's fine. It's a token deck. It's a beatdown deck. You're going to make a bunch of tokens with a bunch of different things. There's only 16 creatures, so a lot of the ways you're doing this is through enchantments or sorceries. But I think it has a little trouble closing out games. Boros is not famous for overruns, so I think the deck is looking for things that are a little more impactful than just pumping by +1/+1.
This set was pretty cool too, considering you could play certain artifacts and they would come with a token attached, which is where a lot of that gets that synergy. But with so few creatures and just the Amber, and the fact that it's just hard to close it out because you don't have any extra damage, I think that's just what's keeping it struggling down at the bottom.
Yeah, and check this out. 22 basics, 6 fixers, 10 utility lands. I like the 10 utility. I get greedy with my 2-color decks too, but 22 basics, come on now. 8 ramp, 9 removal, and 8 card draw. This doesn't even fit with like the Commander deck building template 7 years ago. This is just kind of behind on all accounts.
Coming up next is 19, Growing Threat with Brimaz, Blight of Oreskos. This is an Orzhov deck that says when you cast Phyrexians, you incubate X where it's their mana value, and if Phyrexians die, you can proliferate. That's pretty cool and all, but I don't think Orzhov is usually the color where you think about incubating, or just Infect in general, where he would be much better in an Infect deck.
Phyrexians were the black-white limited theme, and this seems like an extension of that. But incubating, we don't have to tell you that. It's pretty weak in Commander. I think Brimaz has a lot of applications outside of just putting +1 counters on artifacts that you have to put effort into turning into creatures. This can grow a board state, and maybe, you know, the incubates are probably pretty good at surviving board wipes. I think this deck is one of the ones on the list that came out in 2023 that would benefit the most from upgrades. As soon as you get poison involved in this whole situation, Brimaz gets real scary. This deck was about $50, but it's like 43 today.
It's not the worst value, but it definitely didn't hold it. There's some reprints like Ancient Stone Idol, not the worst reprint, and Fetid Heath, which I guess we're playing into better mana bases, so I'm not mad at that.
Yeah, I like that we start seeing the hybrid lands being reprinted. I want more of that in 2024. The new cards, Excites the Imperfect was one people talked about, and Bitterthorn I have liked a lot, and I'm starting to put it in more and more decks. It's like $10 now, and I kind of want more. Apparently, it's a quarter of the value of the whole deck.
I heard people get so excited, including you, over that card, though, and I'm really excited to see it played more. It's really cool.
I think there's just so many cards printed that cards that seem cool when they come out, like Bitterthorn, that aren't the chase hyped cards of the set, are going to start seeing play next year. Like, that's how we're just so delayed because we have too much stuff in front of our face.
I'm still finding out stuff from Streets of New Capenna, so yeah, I completely agree.
Gimbal, who's that?
You've only played against him twice.
Yeah. The synergy of this deck is, like we said, medium. Focusing only on Incubate is just low for power. Cool for coolness. And then the duds of this deck, Scythe Claw, Go for the Throat. We're never going to recommend those cards. Mana base, 23 basics, yikes, 12 fixers, and 3 utilities, 14 ramps, 16 removal, and 8 card draw. Wow. Is there just a direct correlation between lack of card draw and being low on this list?
I definitely think that plays a part into it, but the fact that these are just also strategies that don't hold up well after one board wipe, I think that can also just be a correlation. How well can you recover after one board wipe?
Yeah, this deck might be okay. It's going to have a lot of vanilla creatures after a board wipe. Number 18 is Ahoy Mateys. Just recently came out in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. This has Admiral Brass Unsinkable as the commander. She wants pirates in your graveyard, and she brings them back with finality counters. The original price is $40. Today's value is $56. So pretty solid on that. I can't complain. The reprints and the new cards were powerful and useful.
I really like the fact that if you blink pirates, you could get rid of the finality counters, so you can keep just recurring them. However, pirates themselves don't have a lot of synergy, and this deck really didn't bring a ton more to it, which kind of makes it fall really low on our list.
Yeah, pirates like artifacts and pirates like treasures, but pirates don't necessarily love milling and dying and coming back from the graveyard. The new cards for this deck were the Indomitable. Don Andres, the Renegade's another cool one, but kind of like for different decks. The reprints, Black Market Connections, obviously that was a great reprint. That was like pushing $20+. And Pitiless Plunderer, this is like the first reprint for Pitiless Plunderer basically ever, and I'm super happy about that. So that's part of what's going towards the $56, and I'm happy about this deck for that. But pirates, the fact that they don't have that much support, and the fact that I think this deck is just bad at milling you to put pirates in your yard so you have more selection when you use Brass's ability, just makes this deck fall flat just a little bit.
I think it also got filled up with cards like Departed Deckhand and Ghost of Ramiro's Di Pietro, and that just makes the deck really rough. I feel like it's just going in multiple directions at that point, and it's just not bringing enough oomph to pirates, which really need it.
Yeah, we do have 15 basics, which is lower than a lot of the precons we've seen. 17 fixers, 5 utility, we got 10 ramp, 13 removal, and check this out, card draw, 11, double digits. This deck can actually draw cards, so I will say it's probably a little bit better at surviving a board wipe, perhaps.
Number 17 is another Lord of the Rings deck. It's Elven Council with Galadriel, Elven Queen as the commander. She's a Simic commander that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if an elf ETB'd under your control, you can vote for 2 things. One of them says you can get a 1/1 on your ring bear and the ring tempts you, or you can draw a card if the votes are tied or it gets more votes. Honestly, I think that the voting here was a little weak because it's kind of like, it's not that impactful. And I just think that it should have just either gone with elves or voting, and it kind of just goes in the middle.
Yep, $55 to start and 81 today. Solid value. That's probably what's keeping up on this list. Heroic Intervention, Swan Song. Some pretty solid reprints in this deck. Some new cards like Haldir, Lorien Lieutenant, Raise the Palisade, cards that had people brewing. There was also, what do you call it? You call it Elf Rachnogenesis or something?
Elf Rachnogenesis, you know what I'm talking about.
Elf Rachnogenesis, the fog that makes elves based on attackers. That's another cool new card for this deck. I have a quote written down here from our Lord of the Rings Precon review. Apparently I said this is not a confused deck. It's just a bad deck because at least it has the 2 themes, and it doesn't really stray from that, like, you know, the Masters of Evil precon with 17 different possible commanders in it. This is like you're playing elves and you're voting. So it's a little torn between those 2 things, but there is like a good elf deck kind of trapped inside this deck. So if you draw the right half of your deck, you'll probably get somewhere.
I think voting can be a lot of fun, and certain times it can be very impactful, like with Expropriate. We all know how impactful that is. But with these choices, they're not that impactful. They're incredibly lackluster at best.
Yeah, no one's going to give you a card with Galadriel. I'm just going to give you a +1 counter, and you can make a...
You could tempt.
Choose a new ring bear if you want. I'm not too worried about that. I don't want you drawing cards, so they'll just stop you from doing that. The tension isn't there. There's some duds like Mirkwood Trapper and Mirkwood Elk. Apparently the Mirkwood is not the place to be in Lord of the Rings if you want good magic cards.
I mean, Mirkwood Bats, but that's a different story.
That's true. You know, in the skies of Mirkwood, there's stuff, but not on the ground. Just forget about it. 26 basics, 9 fixers, 3 utility. Do I need to mention that that's just subpar? 14 ramp. That's good. There has like Arbor Elf in this deck. There's like ways to power out strong starts. This deck can go Arbor Elf into Elvish Archdruid, and you got something going there. You're going to start ramping out things. Removal, 11. Pretty okay for Simic. Simic has trouble with that sometimes. But the card draw, you already knew it was below 10. It's at 7. Number 16, if you're building decks online and you're having trouble with what to do, you better call for backup. The commander is Bright Palm Soul Awakener. It has backup 1, and when the creature, either it or whatever it backs up, attacks, you double the number of counters on it, and it's got like a little bit of evasion where it can't be chump block, but not full evasion. I'd honestly rather just have a trample or something, but this is like, I feel like the deck everybody forgot about. You know, it doesn't excel in anything, but it's really not awful. This deck is like full of proactive creatures. If you curve out and start chaining backups and doubling counters, you could run people over for sure. I just don't think anybody was like, Oh yeah, my favorite commander, Bright Palm, Soul Awakener.
This is definitely one of the more forgettable decks, considering when I think about backup, I think of like Archpriestess Shadows, which you can't run in here. But at least when you paid $50 for it, you're getting 43 back. Not the best value, but it's not as steep of a value loss as some of the other ones lower on this list.
Yeah, we're like, at least you don't lose that much. This is almost the opposite, because it's worth less, but it's made up for by the fact that this deck is okay. We'll get to one glaring problem with the deck that would have saved it if they could have
There's a few.
fixed this. Yeah, but the reprints, we got Colonial Hydra. That was a really good one. At the time, I want to say it was like $18 to $20. Like, what a great reprint. Flame Shadow Conjuring, I think, was closer to like $6 at the time that this came out, and that's still a fine card. People like this card. I don't know what it's doing in this deck, but people like it.
Those were a couple of really neat reprints. There are a few new cool cards too, like Guardian Scalelord and Conclave Sledge Captain, which are really playing into the backup theme.
Yeah, they needed to put more backup cards in this deck, and they did that. They gave you some new backup things. It's not the most supported mechanic ever, so you can't build like the backup deck. You kind of have to build a +1 counters deck. The synergy for this deck, what did you think?
I don't think it was the best, considering the really good reprint was the Hydra and everything else was kind of meh. And the deck was really clunky, considering there's a lot of mana that you need to pour into it. It's pretty rough around the edges.
Yeah, Falcon Wrath Exterminator, High Sentinels of Arishan are in this deck, and we hope we don't draw them, because the problem with this deck, it will become very apparent shortly. 13 basics, 16 fixers, 9 utility, that's fine. 14 ramp, 9 removal, 4 card draw, 4 Bright Palm? You're trying to be my favorite commander, and you brought 4 card draw spells.
They're going to run out of gas so quickly. It's going to be like oh, okay, I 1 card a turn, that's my favorite.
Yeah, I wonder if this deck in playtesting was too much better than the rest of them, if they gave it, like 10 card draw spells, because you've got the beef, and you can snowball out of control, but maybe they didn't want you to rebuild. I'm not sure, but it has to, the deck suffers as a result.
I mean, maybe. Honestly, this entire cycle wasn't the best, so...
Yeah, March of the Machines, little lackluster. There'll be a few at the top, but not most of them.
So I think they needed to nuke it somehow. Number 15 is a deck that everyone was really excited for, but it fell just a tiny bit flat. It's Eldrazi Unbound with the commander Zuladog Void Gorger. Basically, he says spells with 7 mana or above has Cascade, which is really cool, but he doesn't really help protect himself. This started at $105 for the starting price, rough, and its value today is $110, so not much more appreciation.
I'm glad it kept the value at least. These were, the Commander Masters Precons were really weird. A lot of them pre-ordered really high, and then they dropped right before release. So this is kind of the price we settled at. It was about $105. Some people bought it for $150. Some people probably bought it for $80. It was really weird times when these Precons came out. But $110 today, maybe rate that against what you paid for it, and then you can gauge how good this was. As far as Zuladog himself, he gives like those 7 drops huge bonus, Cascade, but it is only from your hand, so you can't chain a 10 drop into 2 9 drops into 2 8 drops into whatever. But it's really strong if you untap. But the problem with this is that it's a 6 mana 7/4 that doesn't have any protection, and that's probably by design. But what's going to happen is they're going to kill this thing like every time.
I mean, this is just a colorless Timmy deck, right? It has some good reprints like It That Betrays and Kozilek the Great Distortion. So really good Eldrazi staples, which everyone was really excited for. Eldrazi are one of the most loved types of creatures.
Yeah, they definitely gave you the B squad of Eldrazi. You're not gonna find Emrakul Promised End or Ulamog Ceaseless Hunger, but you got the cheaper ones. They can still close games. But this deck is a combat deck only. You need to play Zuladog and hope to untap, and then play some 7-drop, and then untap again with all those creatures you just played, and then attack, and then you chunked somebody. You didn't kill anybody, you chunked them. New cards, we got Rise of the Eldrazi, super sick. There was like a signature spell for each Eldrazi, and you could definitely check them out. They were all really cool. Skittering Cicada, while not flavorful at all, a neat card for colorless decks.
I think that this deck overall is just really cool in general. I think that everyone was really psyched to see the Commander Masters and kind of the archetypes that they brought with it. But this is the equivalent of just you wait till I untap, considering everything takes so much mana to get going. And Zuladog's not going to survive, and it just folds to a board wipe.
The other thing, though, that this deck did well was we didn't really have a legendary Eldrazi that wasn't completely miserable to play against. This has that style if you want to play Mana Crypt into Worn Power Stone on turn 1, but I'm more thinking like once this deck goes off, it's not as unfun. You don't bully one player out of the game with Annihilator 4 or with exiling both their lands. This is just like, huge value, and then you can attack people evenly if you want. You can attack one person. Like, it's definitely the most fun of the Eldrazi.
There were a few duds in this deck, though.
As always.
Some of them are Endless One and Suspicious Bookcase. The bookcase, that's definitely not flavorful.
This is some of the lowest lows of any precon. Endless One and Suspicious Bookcase. Please get out of my deck. I'm trying to play good cards.
I'm happy to see, though, in the mana base, there are 15 basics, which, at least with wastes, that's at least $1 per piece. So that's some serious value in the lands alone. There's 0 fixers, because you don't need them. And
that's a bummer.
And 23 utility. There's a lot of colorless utility lands that you could cram in here to make your deck run better.
That's pretty much how it works. That's the only way they could have split it, but I'm glad they gave us a decent chunk of wastes. 15 ramp spells, not bad when we're trying to cast 7 drops. This deck is very clunky. 14 removal spells, which is surprising for a colorless deck. And 11 card draw, which helps you maybe win the game or not die if Zul'Dok dies immediately, and you can go, oh, okay, that's fine. I'll just draw, not miss my land drops, and then I'll cast my 8 drops, 10 drops on schedule and still try to win the game.
Though I think that this deck is also a just you wait till I untap deck. I think this is one of the first decks in this list that is really consistent, too.
Yeah, I mean, against Precons, which is, I'd assume, what you're playing this against, it's throwing haymakers endlessly after turn 6, and you got to be ready for that. You got to be able to have those board wipes, and some of these cards are so much value, like if you play It That Betrays, and then you get a few permanents off of it. Sure, a board wipe takes that out, but that was only 1 or 2 cards. You can just rebuild with another Eldrazi with another cast trigger. That was the Eldrazi, but we also got the other big bad of Magic, the Phyrexians, in on it. This is number 14, Corrupting Influence, led by Ixal, Scion of Atraxa, one of the only commanders I built from this year. It's super sweet. It's got 2 power, 2 toxic. It's got flying, and then if they're corrupted, you get to like Gonti, their top card, and keep it forever. Ixal's good inherent card advantage, and it's a deck that, while it is trying to poison you, you could hang back at 3 poison or 5 poison while you're building up resources and just let the value train roll in. But I play it, of course, as a super aggressive infect deck that's trying to, take people out like a burn deck. This is a cool commander. I wanted another Abzan commander, and I wanted an infect commander.
I think that this is really fun considering there are certain ways to build poison, like Beezy, which is very aggressive, which is the kill him immediately type deal.
Play Virulent Sliver.
But the fact that Ixal is card advantage in itself and doesn't require that much poison means that you can go oh no, I'm not the threat, you're at 3 poison. What is that, only a few life if you convert it into life? I think that's a really good tactic or way to build this deck if you don't want to go the full aggro route.
Yeah, original price $50. Today's value $63, so not bad. And that's interesting because a lot of the infect cards for this deck completely tanked in value. So I'm not even sure what is propping up the value of this, but I'm happy to say that at least it wasn't a dud. Reprints Norn's Annex, that's a dud. And Noxious Revival, both cards people were seeking, even though I don't think Norn's Annex is very good.
This isn't about whether you like them. This is about whether people want them in reprints.
Yes.
There were some really cool new cards, though. Phyresis Outbreak, the Poison Board Wipe, and Norn's Choirmaster. That was spiking for a while, too.
Maybe that's where some of the value is. There was some strong synergy. Ixal's a lot of value, and most of the deck was focused on poison counters. There's a few duds like Mycosynth Fiend. Why are you here? I understand that you say the word poison, but you're not actually helping me. And Windborn Muse, okay, actually, why are you here? Because you don't even say the word poison. Why does me playing Infect necessitate taxing my opponents for attacking me back? I don't get it. They're going to attack me anyway. I'm going to have to deal with that because I'm playing Infect.
I think precons are one of those things where it's like the right of the deck builder to go, maybe not all of this deck is good.
Yeah,
it's like
that is definitely
pains.
It's part of it. It's part of the fun. 20 basics, kind of high. 14 fixers and 4 utility lands, 14 ramp spells, 12 removal spells, and 9 card draw. So pretty safe numbers. I can't be mad at that. It is single digits, but Ixal is card advantage, and she can draw you like 3 cards in a turn.
Number 13 is another Doctor Who precon. It's Blast from the Past. The commanders are the 4th Doctor, who says you can look at the top card of your library, and when you play historic lands or cast historic spells, you make a food token. And Sarah Jane Smith, the Doctor's companion, who says the first time you cast a historic spell each turn, you investigate. So this is just making a lot of tokens here and there and just getting value from them.
Yeah, the original price $50. Today's value $66. Very solid. We're always looking to be in the green. This is a deck that is just kind of like a hodgepodge of everything. Kind of looks the same when you read all of the creatures in this deck. You won't know what any of them did after you read the last one because they're all like, make a food if a historic land was cast somewhere from not your hand, and if you attacked, you get to cycle a historic card and investigate, and they all just sort of blend together for me, at least for me. There was a few good reprints. Historic intervention and 3 visits. New cards, we got like Bessie the Doctor's Roadster. Displaced Dinosaurs was the big one. That's actually the only non-legendary creature in the deck, so this deck very focused on historic stuff, but you're being pulled in like 10 slightly different directions. Someone cares about sagas. Ian Chesterton that replicates sagas, and then there's like Joe who gives historic cards cycling, and they're not on the same wavelength, but they're all caring about the same cards.
I like the fact that you can kind of mix and match your commanders, considering every, or most of them at least, can be your commander. However, because they can all be your commander, most of them just don't work as well with each other as you'd like them to. So there's also going to be a lot of triggers. There's going to be food, there's going to be clues, there's going to be everything. There's going to be 10 sagas going off, and then you're like, I'm not exactly sure what you get out of it in the long run.
Right, and since you have so many commander potential options, you got the 5th Doctor and the 2nd Doctor is just kind of duds because they're their own thing. Go build the 5th Doctor deck and the 2nd Doctor deck, but they don't go in this deck. We got 7 basics in the deck. Super good. Doctor Who Precons nailed it. 28 fixers, 1 utility land, 11 ramp, 11 removal, and 8 card draw, which I will forgive even more than usual because the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane are both drawing cards. So as long as you get them down, which they're pretty easy to do, they're like 2 and 4 mana, then you just start getting value for pretty much the rest of the game. This seemed like a solid deck. Definitely great mana too.
I think that it did have a lot of consistency, but with its kind of lack of focus, that's what makes it a little bit rough and lower on our list.
Moving into our top half of 2023 Commander Precons, we got number 12, Sliver Swarm. Now, the commander of this deck is actually Moxfield.com. It's a website that says if you log on, create an account, and follow the Nitpicking Nerds, you're going to have a super smooth process of building all of your commander decks from here on out.
If you go on Moxfield.com, there's actually a Wizards of the Coast account, which is run by Moxfield themselves, which keeps the original lists of all the precons, of whether they're Commander or Pioneer or whatever, so you can actually look back and see the original lists.
It's actually super useful, and I've used it many, many times, including partially for research for this video. It's kind of nice to just have a time capsule and know that while someone can post a deck and say, this is the Tinker Time Precon, how do I know that they haven't added or swapped cards? This one is like official. It's literally it's not Wizards of the Coast, but it's Moxfield keeping like the integrity of these original decks just kind of out there for you to find. Super useful. And we'll get back to the actual commander of Sliver Gravemother, which gives slivers in graveyards like Encore, and then she's got Encore, and it's just the legend rule doesn't apply to slivers you control. It's kind of weird. It gets out of control. The original price, $100. Today's value, $103. Not great. I mean, we got our money back, so it breaks even. But for $100, down payment, I want a little more than that.
Yeah, at some point people were also ordering this one at like $150 too, so
Yeah.
it's pretty rough if you go by that original price. But there were some good reprints, some of them being like Sliver Hive Lord and Gale Rider Sliver. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to the land base, which we'll get into a little bit later, there was only one land over $1. So that is rough considering this bare minimum you're paying over $100 for this deck.
You're paying this premium price, and they really screwed you on lands. There's like 16 tap lands in this deck. It's all the ones that are, either the tapped tri-lands, the slow fetches, or, like these are good, but we would want more like this, like the Prairie Stream Cycle. And it's very lackluster for $100. The synergy of this deck is amazing. We've said other decks are unfocused. This is the least focused deck I've ever seen. There's like 41 slivers in it, and everything else is just slivers do this. So this is a really good deck out of the box. It's almost identical to just a fully maxed slivers deck with regards to the slivers themselves. This is just almost all of the best slivers already. So this is like a perfect deck to buy if you're like thinking about playing slivers and you don't own any of them.
You would just need a few spells like removal and such. And I think there's probably like 3 slivers that they don't include that you would really like to upgrade.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's like really good if you're going for that type out of the box.
Yeah, the non-creature spells in the deck is where you need to upgrade. And of course, the really sad mana base. There's 11 basics, which is okay. 26 fixers, which we mentioned that are all tap lands, and 0 utility lands. 11 ramp, 8 removal, and 11 card draw. So very functional deck out of the box, just held back a little bit by the mediocre price value.
Number 11 is one for the Enchantress decks, Virtue and Valor, with Elevere of the Wild Court. She says when she ETBs or attacks, you make a Virtuous roll, which basically says that it gets +1/+1 on a creature for each enchantment that you control. And when an enchanted creature deals combat damage, you draw a card. I really like the fact that this does give card advantage in the command zone, and the fact that it can help pump your team.
It's like your built-in win condition and card draw. You just want to keep this card alive. Original price $35. This is one of the cheaper precons, and today's value of the card's $45. So I'm pretty happy with that, especially if you want to factor it into like ratios and percentages. This is a really good value. The reprints that mattered, Umbra, Mystic, and Bear Umbra were some of them. New cards, we got like Unfinished Business, Sweet Reanimation Spell, Songbird's Blessing, which like flips until you hit auras, and it's kind of wacky, but it all fits together. This is a very consistent, very focused deck. It's going to poop out a bunch of enchantments, and Elevere's part of your guaranteed way to make sure that your creatures are crashing in no matter what they are, but then you've also got other ways to close out games.
There's so much value in Enchantress decks to begin with, and Elevere just really kind of like takes charge and will just help with the combat damage, which I think sometimes is the only part that Enchantress decks really struggle with. There are a couple duds though, like Cloak Giant, which maybe plays into like the thematic fairy tale type
Eldraine,
deal,
yeah.
but it's not really the greatest in this deck. And Sylvan Ranger, it's what
It sure is a creature. I mean, you can put it in any deck. I just don't know why it's in this one. I don't know really, like it doesn't do anything. It just gets a land. So I like the strong Enchantress base for this deck. It's pretty sweet. It means that some of the upgrades you'll already have in the deck, because like, oh, I would love Eidolon of Blossoms in this deck. It's already in there. I'd love Enchantress's Presence. It's already in there. 10 ramp, 6 removal, 9 card draw, 29 basics, 5 fixers, and 5 utility. That is another thing holding this deck back a little bit. I mean, top 11 ain't bad, but 29 basics that's kind of silly. That's like so many.
I think you can afford to put a little bit more ramp in there so you can power out your spells, because when you put in the Enchantress staples and like the 10 that you're missing, you're going to be able just to draw so many cards that you're going to need a way to play them too.
We're hitting our top 10 with Paradox Power, commanded by the 13th Doctor and Yasmin Khan. Yasmin is Impulse Draw. 13th Doctor puts counters on dudes when you cast stuff not from your hand and untaps your creatures with counters on them. Feeds into itself a little bit. Original price $50. Today's value $61. Pretty fair. Reprints Carpet of Flowers, Stormcarved Coast. A lot of lands like all the Doctor Who precons have. Good land value, but not a ton outside of that. This is a deck that's like a Cascade deck, but not a Cascade deck. It's trying to tell you that it's something else, but it wants you to mostly Cascade. There's like, you could discover if you want to upgrade it with like Lost Caverns cards, and it's got like Rebound and other ways to cast from exile, but mostly Cascade.
I think it has ways to close the game too, so overall it's just a well-rounded deck. There's things like Bigger on the Inside, which we were really excited for Cascade decks, and Into the Time Vortex. I think that not only are these flavorful, these are just like pretty good cards in general that can go into more decks than just this precon.
Yeah, so Blast from the Past and Masters of Evil sort of got the short ends of the stick, because they were like, okay, we want to put every Doctor Who character in the set for some reason. Here's all the villains and here's all the heroes. So then there's 2 other decks that just ended up being more cohesive, Timey-Wimey and Paradox Power, because they got to focus on like 2 or 3 doctors and not 8 or whatever is in the first one. So that was nice. 11 basics, 19 fixers, 6 utility lands. There are some duds, Thajarian Witness and Madame Vastra and Jenny Flint, who are just trying to go off and do their own thing. That's what they would rather do.
I'd love to see them in their own deck, but not in this one. There's 14 ramp spells, 8 removal spells, and 10 card draw spells. So we're getting into the more consistent decks, which is why it's making the top 10. Number 9 is the first swing of Eminence after Commander 2017. It's Cavalry Charge with Sidar Jabari of Zalfir. He's a flying first strike. He has Eminence that says when he's in the command zone or on the battlefield, you can draw and discard when you attack with 1 or more knights, and if he deals combat damage, you bring a knight from the graveyard to the battlefield, which is a pretty cool effect.
Works with itself perfectly. You attack with whatever knight you played on turns 2 or 3, and then you actually want to play Sidar Jabari, unlike Edgar Markov or the Ur-Dragon. They do have abilities, but this actually encourages you with the Reanimate, which is powerful and can save you a bunch of mana. Price originally $50, today's value $47. So this was a deck that ended up being really good and really focused, and it's totally sweet. It just loses some, and it can't hit, like the top 5, because the reprint value is pretty bad, or the value in general is pretty bad.
I think that people were really nervous about Eminence because it was like, oh no, the other ones were so broken. And this came out and like, oh, it's not broken. Let's just forget about it.
I like this.
I like it too.
The sky was not falling. We got Hero of Bladehold, Vanquisher's Banner as some decent reprints. We got Herald of the Hoofbeats as like a sick Knights payoff and Lockthwain Lancer. There was a lot of Knights payoffs. They really wanted to like help make this 3-color Kindred deck stand out and give it a little bit more reason to exist. You know, you can't just say this is Esper Knights and just put all the cards that happen to be Knights in a deck. They have to tie together somehow.
I like the fact that it is Reanimator too, which is something you don't really see in Esper as much, and the fact that it does give Knights more support because they were a little bit lacking prior.
Yeah, Eminence really holds this deck together because Knights are kind of lower powered, but you got some crazy payoffs mixed around in the deck. I think Voldalian Wave Knight is another one where I just read it and I go, okay, super sweet, but there are duds. We got Xerex Strobe Knight that you'll happily cut, and Knight of the Last Breath, which you will also happily cut. They work with the deck. They actually make tons of sense, which is interesting because we're getting so high that the duds for this deck are cards that absolutely make sense, and I could totally see from a precon standpoint. We're just not interested. You know, we have to cut them for better cards.
Unfortunately, though, unlike the Doctor Who mana base, this one is still kind of lacking. 19 basics, 17 fixers, and 3 utility. I think we could do a bit better. There are 10 ramp spells, 10 removal spells, and 14 card draws, though, which makes this really, really consistent. Overall, I think my takeaway from this deck is that I would like to see Eminence again, which I know might be kind of an unpopular opinion, but I would like to see it so long as it's pretty fair like this.
Yeah, test the waters. And 14 card draw, that's not even counting the free looting that you're going to get from Sidar Jabari, because that's not card advantage, it's just card filtering. You just get that no matter what, and this deck can churn through and even discard its bad cards to get to the better ones, and just, I love this deck. It's so sweet. But so is this deck, number 8, Enduring Enchantments. Commander's a Nyxthea, Hand of Erebos. She makes copies of enchantments as enchantment creatures that like trigger your constellation again, and this deck is like value city graveyard theme. I love a good Abzan deck. The original price $66, today's value $81.
Honestly, this year was kind of the year of the Abzan regarding precons. Was another one we'll talk about later, but this is really solid. I think it's a lot of fun that you can bring enchantments back from the graveyard, so another like weird reanimation strat, but they're also creatures. That's super cool.
I like it a lot. You get a lot of the ETBs and so much value. Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Naked Dry Boy as we call him, solid reprint. Starfield of Nyx, not my personal jam for the enchantment decks, but a card that people wanted, so I'm glad it's here.
There's some new cards too that were really cool. Composer Spring and Ghoulish Impetus. I remember people were talking about Ghoulish Impetus, but I have yet to see it as much as they were talking about. I want to see it more. That's really cool.
It's a card that's spiked up, and it's probably a solid chunk of this $81. I didn't think it would do anything in terms of price, but maybe just printing more powerful impetuses is a cool idea. As for synergy, a lot of already enchantment staples already in this deck, so you don't have to do a ton for upgrading it. You just have to figure out, how do I fill my graveyard in the right way and have a Nyxthea trigger on the best things, and what can I do? And there's sagas in here that work perfectly with it. It's just like, this is a well-oiled machine. There's 43 enchantments in here. This is the focus kind of precon that I want. This does one thing, and it does it really well, and you're not going to run out of cards.
I like the fact that this deck is really focused, but it doesn't crumble without a Nyxthea too. So the fact is that if she keeps getting removed and you keep increasing that commander tax, you can still like churn out a win. There are a couple duds in here though. Omen of the Sun, Love Song of Night and Day. I think you could just do better in Enchantress decks when you can get so much more value than these two.
Once again, not the worst floor to have. Compared to some of the other stuff like Falcon Wrath, whatever his name was that I mentioned an hour ago. Yeah, Windborn Muse. Like, these are okay duds to have. Mana base, 19 basics, 17 fixers, 1 utility. Pretty standard. Ramp, 13. Removal, 10. And card draw, 12. We got the card draw we wanted. And I'm noticing that Wizards just kind of likes putting a bunch of ramp in their precons, which I am not against.
I think that's a really good thing to do too, considering I feel like with precons, the average CMC is higher than a deck that you and I would build, so you need to get that ramp to actually play your spells and to keep up with other decks. Number 7 is a combo that actually gave Suspend some viability in these metas. It's Timey Wimey with the 10th Doctor and Rose Tyler. 10th Doctor says he gives things suspend counters and puts time counters on things, and you can time travel 3 times at sorcery speed for 7 mana. Rose Tyler gets really, really big for the amount of time counters and permanents you have with time counters on them. So she can just really hit in for some combat damage and commander damage.
Yeah, $80 originally, but today's value is $101. really respectable, especially since you know that we've already got the sick Doctor Who Precon mana base that we talked about before. This one has 9 basics, 21 fixers, and 7 utility. We'll just get that out of the way. Reprints, we got Farewell and Wedding Ring. Some decent ones. I don't think Wedding Ring is my favorite card, but Farewell is one of Mia's favorite cards, so that kind of works out.
I am so happy to see that Farewell got new art and a new reprint, and it's still holding value, which can show how good of a card it is. There's some... Unfortunately, though, there are some new cards that are less good than Farewell. Everybody Lives was one that we notoriously don't really like. And we do like Flesh Duplicate, though. I think that's a really cool clone type effect.
Yeah, we actually have a frowny face on our script. It's like an emoji, too. I don't even know how it got there. Right next to Everybody Lives. So that's just a card that we're never going to be huge fans of. This deck can actually get out of hand. Rose the 10th Doctor can run away with the game completely if you have a good enough draw. It's going to be easier in a deck that's like upgraded, designed specifically for these cards, but this deck has a lot of those cards. The specific nature of this deck is held back a little bit by some of the random like sagas and legends of like, here's an episode from season 9. Does that fit with this deck? Probably not. But Rose and 10th Doctor, they're a really good combo. It also fills 2 of your first 5 turns, and it's going to make it feel like this deck more so than others is going to curve out a lot.
Honestly, this deck is really powerful. We've seen it a couple of times, and the 10th Doctor actually combos with what? Rousing Refrain, right?
Yeah.
So you get like infinite mana or something?
Don't think it's in this deck, but it is just worth knowing in general. Jenny, Generated Anomaly, and Fractured Identity. Some of the randos we're cutting that we talked about. 8 ramp, 9 removal, and 9 card draw. But part of the 10th Doctor's thing is he kind of draws cards. You know, it like flips to you, hit something, and then you're going to cast it later. So I guess I could count that and have it be round up to 10, which is good stats. Ramp's a little low, I guess. Let's keep moving. Number 6, Fey Dominion from Wilds of Eldraine. Tegwil, Duke of Splendor is the commander. It's got Death Touch, so it's a little tricky little blocker. And then your fairy's dying, draws your cards and makes you lose some life. Original price, 45. At today's value, 57. Pretty good start. Pretty good for the starting point. This is a deck that is just fairies, instants, flash. It's really tricky. There's Brazen Borrower, Glenelendra Archmage. They didn't really skimp on the best fairies and commanders, so this is like a pretty good selection, and it's a very focused deck.
Honestly, we've seen it played against our 20s before, and it can hang. I think the card quality in here is really good. There's a few new cards, too, like Malleable Imposter, Misleading Signpost, too. I think it's really fun in this deck because you can get a little bit tricky. I mean, that's the nature of fairies. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you can flash things out so quickly makes it really fun and keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, we got a lot of flash synergy, a lot of, Nimrus is in here and those types of things. Alayla, the alternative commander, cares about doing flash things. There's just some also randomly good cards like Snap is in here. Snap is great. And Hullbreaker Horror, this was a card that when we played against this Precon with our $20 decks, which I would guess that $20 decks probably have a little bit of advantage. Hullbreaker Horror in this deck is messed up. It is so good. It's a messed up card already, but this deck can take advantage of it like really no other Precon could.
It's so nasty, and I think that the fact that it can get value off all of its cards, regardless of whether they're fairies or not, makes this deck really strong, and it's what keeps it really high on our list.
Yeah, there's a few cards we don't care about. Keep Watch is whatever. Thrilling Encore, you're never going to make work, but maybe they get a little bit better since you can hold up so many different cards and you can cast something else if you don't want to cast these if nobody plays into them. Mana base, 25 basics, pretty rough, but 10 fixers, which is better than the Elevere sister Precon, and 4 utility lands. 9 ramp, 15 removal, that's fairies for you, and 11 card draw just kind of makes this a well-oiled machine. It's got cantrips too, so some of that deck can be smoothed through, and it's almost like it has even more of those things then.
It's really solid, and I think that this is one of the decks where I think that the value of the deck, not just like value money-wise, but the value was definitely worth the original price.
Yeah, it's just a cohesive deck. You could easily play this and not have to upgrade it really at all.
Number 5 in Year of the Abzan is Food and Fellowship with Frodo and Sam as the commanders. Frodo says you can choose your ring bearer, you can draw a card if the ring's tempted you more than twice, and Sam says he just makes a lot of foods and foods cost less for you to activate.
Yeah, Year of the Abzan is right. This is our third Abzan Precon, and they're all kind of bangers in totally different spaces. I'm in.
I think that this is really fun, and the fact that I like the fact that they're bringing back partners, but in a controlled way that makes them powerful, but not just overwhelmingly powerful like we had in Commander Legends.
Yeah, we had Doctor's Companion this year. We also got a couple more partners with cards. Super sweet. Original price, 55. Today's value, 70. Good, solid. Sam and Frodo are very... They know how to spend their money. They're great. They gave us value in the Precons. We got to thank them.
We really do. Toxic Deluge and Birds of Paradise, two banger reprints that I love to see.
Thanks, guys.
Regarding new cards, though, the Gaffer is a really good value card here, and Bilbo Birthday Celebrant, I think that's just a really fun win con, considering you're trying to get to that 111 life.
Kind of doable in this deck. This deck is great at gaining life. It's really good. It's focused. There's a lot of payoffs that say whenever you gain 3 life, or at the end step, if you gain 3 or 4 life, you get a flyer, you get a thing, some kind of tangible benefit, and it just makes this deck actually be able to win games. It is kind of slow. If you keep if you keep Frodo off the board, they can't chip in as much to get like the value from when they complete the ring dungeon, whatever you want to call it. So if you keep Frodo off the field, it'll be a little bit slower, but the deck can still come back from board wipes. It still gets value. We played against this Precon a couple times, actually, and it was sitting with like 7 cards in its hand, no problem, which is interesting because it only has 7 card draw. It's got 11 removal and 10 ramp.
I think overall this is a very solid Precon, and I like the fact that food has more of a use now. I think before Lord of the Rings, I thought food was, I'm not going to say useless, but it was definitely one of the token artifacts where I'm just kind of like, well, it's not treasure, so it's not that good.
Or somebody would say, you built a food deck. It's like, why?
Yeah.
This is why. You get a lot of payoffs for this. Some duds. Call for Unity. Great Oak Art Guardian, probably just in there for flavor reasons. You know, all these cards got new Lord of the Rings treatments. So 16 basics, 19 fixers, and 3 utility. Not bad. Not as good as the Doctor Who Precons, but we still say 16 basics. You know, the number of basics is less than the number of fixers. That's good. I'll take it.
We can't complain. It's a Precon.
Literally, yeah. Some of them else were like 29 basics or something. At number 4, we have our little explorers, the Explorers of the Deep, Hackball of the Surging Soul. Explores for all your merfolk, and then it's even got a way, since you're going to be exploring so many lands into your hand, to put lands onto the battlefield. Super sick card. It really ties merfolk together in an awesome way. Original price $40, today's value $54.
I think it's really awesome considering if you don't want to put lands out too, you can draw cards. That's just really helpful. And the fact that it's some really cool reprints. Branching Evolution and Thassa, God of the Sea. I don't think that's a particularly flavorful added, but it's a good reprint, and you know, that's worth a bit of money. Yeah,
take those cards out, put them in the other decks that you want that they're going to go in. Bygone Marvels and Wave Goodbye are some of the new cards that you're going to see for this deck. The synergy is just, there's so much card advantage associated with Hackball. This deck's never going to miss a land drop in the history of the world. You're exploring. The sub-theme of counters is totally reasonable. It makes a lot of sense. It's a good sub-theme because there's a fair amount of support for it. We got duds. We got Aetherize, and we got Thassa that we just mentioned, who, you know, they can just get the heck out of our deck. But overall, really strong. It ties the merfolk together. It's not a deck that's playing 5 merfolk, 5 beasts, 5 birds, and 5 constructs like a Doctor Who Precon might.
I think also with this deck, they actively included all of the best merfolk. When we were trying to upgrade this, we couldn't really find any merfolk that we would put in that they hadn't already included, which makes us very cohesive. Regarding the mana base, there are 20 basics, 8 fixers, and 8 utilities. We don't quite have that Doctor Who level mana base, but this isn't the worst considering you're going to be putting so many lands down. There are 9 ramp spells, 11 removal spells, and 12 card draw spells, so you're going to have constantly a full hand and lands on the battlefield.
Yeah, that trend is continuing of 8s in the beginning for card draw and 12s at the end of the list in the top. Best of the best. Super funny. They're kind of skimping on dual lands in 2-color decks, it seems like, which is weird because I think you'd be able to include more, but I guess they decide you're not going to be color screwed, so we don't have to splurge all the money on the dual lands.
I think it's also because a lot of the dual colored decks are cheaper too, so they went, you don't need it. You're not paying that much for it.
Yeah, just don't keep a bad hand.
Number 3 is the deck that actually I got the most upgrades for one of my decks from this year, is Blood Rites with Clavileño, First of the Blessed. He basically says when you attack, you can choose a vampire, and it also becomes a demon, and when it dies, you draw a card, and it becomes a 4/3 flying vampire demon, which is super, super cool.
It's like a sacrificey type value deck that just plays a bunch of little vampires and then gets value from your vampires in general. Original price $40. Today's value of the cards $67. Clavileño knows what he's doing. That's a pretty solid ratio. Reprints, Exquisite Blood was in this, and that is nuts to me that they threw such a high value card that I could have sworn they were going to save for some, you know, standard set to hype it up, and they put it in here. It's still pricey, so maybe it's a third of today's value. So maybe we'll see it in another set down the road. And also Bloodghast. Bloodghast is also here. We love you, Bloodghast.
It's definitely dropped in value, though, the Exquisite Blood, at least. So I'm really happy to see that. Regarding new cards, Dusk Legion Sergeant is one that everyone's been talking about. An Order of Sacred Dusk, Exalted and Vampires, that's really fun, and I'm excited to see it work in my Edgar deck.
Yeah, it's like a giant fireball. Synergy, this is just like so focused on vampires, it's not even funny. 35 vampires, and there's vampires with creature type payoffs. You got Etchings of the Chosen in here, Heirloom Blade, Pact of the Serpent. Some of those are better than others, but the deck knows what it wants to do. When you get 6 vampires in play, you're going to have a good time.
I really like this. I like the fact that it's so thematic and focused, and it is a creature type that everyone loves. Unfortunately, though, there are some duds. Timothar, Baron of Bats, he's never fit in anywhere and stopped making it try and fit in here. Vona, Butcher of Megan, is also another one. I think this is just really tough considering you're not focusing on life gain and life lost, so using her ability is a little rough.
Yeah, Vona's just okay if you throw it in a random deck. You know, it has the vampire crossover, but the life is what you really are going to need to accumulate to activate this more than once. You might activate it once, and that's mediocre. But, you know, it's not the worst floor we've seen. Mana base, 21 basics, 10 fixers, 6 utility. This is a 2-color deck, so they're going to skip on it a little bit. 8 ramp, 10 removal, and 7 card draw. Totally fair stats. I think some of that might have held this deck back a little bit, but it made the top 3. How mad can you be? This is a fantastic precon. We've made it to the top 2 Commander precons. If you can guess what they are, that's pretty impressive. Number 2 is Riders of Rohan. The commander is Eowyn Shield Maiden. She just hits like a truck. She makes 2 2/2s, and you can draw a card if you have 6 humans. She just smashes, and she's got haste, and it's just great. About $55 to start and $70 today. Super great. That's what we're looking for with these types of precons. You got Humans Matters. We're going to see reprints like Door of Destinies, Combat Celebrant, some spicy humans, and some human payoffs.
Humans did not need more payoffs, but I'm still happy to see that they got it because this deck slaps. We've seen it out of the box, and it's very synergistic. There are a couple of new cards, too, that are really awesome. Champions of Minas Tirith, Taunt from the Rampart, which BC has been talking about for a really long time, and I love the goad on it.
Yeah, the goading and just like finishing the game. That gives the deck another win condition. It's pretty reliable, too. The synergy, we got themes, humans and legends. Those 2 themes mesh well together, so you don't get a confused deck. Since every legend is also a human, you just get a deck that smashes you and is very aggressive. Even some of the random uncommons are like giving out double strike and pumping your whole team to where you actually have the overruns in this deck, and you actually have ways to tap down blockers and just crank out damage.
There are, unfortunately, some cards that aren't the best in here, but it's still so high up on this list that they're not the worst either. Dearly Departed and Banishing Light. What do you think about those?
I think stinky, but they don't drag this deck down enough for them to really make too much of an impact, even though they are really bad. 19 basics, 15 fixers, 4 utility, 8 ramp, 12 removal, and 15 card draw. This is like a beatdown deck, so when you get to draw all these cards while every other precon is like, I don't know, make a gremlin token, and you're just like, okay, go back up to 7 cards, play 3 humans, make 2 humans with haste, trigger all my creatures, you're dead, and they just go, I have 3 cards in my hand.
I've seen this deck hang with like $50 and even $100 decks too. It's a really well built deck. So if this is definitely one of the ones where I would say if you had to play something out of the box, this would be it, and this isn't just up here just because of the value of the cards themselves.
Yeah, it is an amazing, possibly the best built precon of 2023.
But the number 1 precon of this entire year with value and with deck synergy is Velociraptor with Pantlaza, Sun Favored, as a commander. It says that when it or another dinosaur ETBs, once per turn you can discover X, where X is the toughness. I like the fact that it's a Cascadey type value, and if you don't want to cast it, you could put it right into your hand. That's really good card selection.
And you mentioned value. Original price $60. Today's value $98. That's what, plus 50%, more than that even. So this deck is just a home run in every possible way. Maybe it's not the literal best deck out of the 25 that we talked about, but that value is sick. The reprints, we have like a Chroma's Will and Apex Altasaur, just some of the big smashy hits that also make this deck able to close out games. The Chroma's Will is an I win button. It's one of the best win cons in Commander, especially at a precon level. You're going to destroy people just because this card is in your deck.
I'm surprised that they didn't reprint the entire cycle in here like they usually do. You know, if there's usually one of a certain cycle, they'll usually scatter the rest in the other precons, but I'm happy to see it in here at least. Also, there's some really cool new cards too. Dinosaur Egg and Wrathful Raptors, which has been making a big splash, and that's one of the cards that everyone's been chasing.
Yeah, all the damage going through, just like blowing everybody up. The synergies. The dinosaurs synergize well together. This deck's got a bit of everything you need, and it's all focused on dinosaurs. It's just a good overall precon. The duds, shifting Ceratops and Majestic Heliopterus. Just some low quality dinosaurs, but they're at least dinosaurs. You know, I didn't say Banishing Light.
Yeah, I think that it doesn't hold the deck back. It's just, ooh, I guess I could upgrade it. With the mana base, there's 16 basics, 17 fixers, and 6 utilities. There's 16 ramp, 15 removal, and 10 card draw too.
Numbers are absurd.
I think that's incredible, which is why it's earning the #1 spot in here. It's just so consistent and really helps you do everything you need to at every part of the game.
And on top of all of this, Pantlaza, if not answered, is just like doubling the amount of value you get every turn. But it's not a card that the whole deck hinges on, so it's just the perfect package. If you want to know what the best 5 precons of all time are, and if any from 2023 made this list, you should check out this video because you're on a precon frenzy and you need to be satiated. Mia, what's our fact of the day?
Make sure to re-sleeve your decks if you need it.